The Ukrainian counteroffensive has failed, as admitted de facto by General Zaluzhny, the commander-in-chief of Ukraine. However, even though the failure of an offensive is bitter, it does not mean defeat in the war. Ukraine can still win this war, and in this video I will explain how they can achieve this as quickly as possible. Since Russia began a full invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Ukraine has been fighting for its survival as an independent state and its territorial integrity. During this time, it has suffered defeats but also achieved 3 spectacular operational successes, whether in the Battle of Kiev or in the offensives in Kharkiv and Kherson. However, Russia has responded with a partial mobilization and subsequent extensive recruitment efforts, increasing arms production and purchasing weapons and ammunition from Iran and North Korea. While the hopes of a quick short war with great loot were shattered, the Russian leadership remains optimistic that it will ultimately prevail. For better understanding, this video is divided into the following chapters. First, why Russia now wants a long war. Second, how Russia is preparing for the long war. Third, why the West should care about a Ukrainian victory. Fourth, what Ukraine needs for victory. And most importantly, fifth, how it can win quickly. Russia wants a long war. Without being forced to, Putin will not admit defeat. He faces a loss of face due to the premature annexations and criticism from the home front. What was the point of all the fallen if at least something is not gained for them? Surveys show that Russians are dissatisfied with the war and would prefer peace negotiations, but they continue to support Putin. If Putin can prolong the war, it allows Russia to gentle mobilization of the economy and avoids the need for large mobilizations of troops and a switch to radical war economy, which would restrict the population. Those who do not sign a contract with the military under pressure can largely ignore the war, which keeps unrest among the people from growing too large without further mobilizations. Most importantly, Russia controls its own destiny, while Ukraine depends on Western aid deliveries. A long war raises hopes that the West will abandon Ukraine due to high costs, political changes after elections, or an economic crisis. The longer the war lasts, the better for Russia, as Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief General Valery Zaluzhny has said, because Russia has more mobilization potential. Russia prepares for a long war. Russia is not only making hundreds of stored tanks combat ready each year, but it also actively is striving to increase its tank production. Russia currently builds at least 200 new tanks a year, and this number is likely to rise. Ukraine currently does not produce any tanks, as far as known. Russia has also announced a new production run of the T-80. After nearly 20 years, production is to resume, which would theoretically mean an increased total number due to the use of other suppliers and components. Missile production has also been significantly increased, and Russia now probably builds well over 100 long-range precision missiles per month. The Russian state budget now allocates 40% for the military, a proud 10% of the national economic output. To supplement its personnel, Russia has not only codified the recruitment of prisoners, but has also made it easier to recruit foreigners through legal adjustments. At the same time, draft dodging is being severely sanctioned, and fleeing abroad is now legally impossible. The draft age has also been increased, allowing Russia to call up even more of its nearly 4 times larger population. The procurement of substitute products to replace sanctioned imports, whether through domestic production from China or established smuggling routes, has started. In addition, the armaments industry in North Korea and Iran has been utilized through imports. Both nations deliver not only ammunition but also weapons and are likely continue doing so, as Russia can provide attractive payment in return through war technology. But why should we in the West care whether Ukraine wins? Because under Putin, Russia has deliberately chosen to be an adversary of the West. From earlier declarations that Ukraine and NATO are sovereign and Ukrainian NATO membership would be a national decision, and a request to the US President Bill Clinton about when Russia would be invited to NATO, the Russian position has evolved to declaring NATO a threat and already waged war against two states that wanted to join NATO. In 2008 against Georgia and since 2014 against Ukraine. Once Putin declares NATO a threat, Russia needs strategic depth and more easily defensible borders in the West. For this, Russia can't stop with Ukraine, but must invade other countries to achieve these goals, likely leading to a confrontation with NATO. Moreover, against a united and undistracted West, Russia has no chance economically and militarily. To win nonetheless, it must cause maximum damage within Western states and worldwide. The greater the global chaos, the more armed conflict worldwide, the easier and sooner Russia can implement its goals in Europe. That's why Moscow talks to terrorist organizations like Hezbollah and Hamas, why every rogue regime can rely on a Russian veto in the UN Security Council as long as it's against the West, why Russia supports parties on both the right and the left fringes of the political spectrum in the Western world as long as they are against the status quo. Stopping Russia helps not only Ukraine, but also protects the West and can have a stabilizing effect worldwide. Only after a significant defeat will Russia no longer be a threat to Europe. Ukrainian morale is still good. To keep it that way, a sense of fairness in conscription and hope are needed. For the first part, Ukraine can ensure better recruitment practices. For the second part, the West plays a large role. Sheer numbers of troops alone will not be enough for Ukraine, even though it can still mobilize 2 or 2.5 million soldiers. Overrunning the Russians with overwhelming numbers, thus imitating Russian tactics, would cost horrendous losses, which Ukraine cannot afford and will not do. Technology will thus have to be the key to success. Modern technology, yes, electronic warfare, anti-drone weapons, etc. But what will also be needed are tanks, armored personnel carriers, IFVs, artillery guns, air defense systems and aircraft. And lots of them. Very many. That much is obvious. Now we come to the most important point, how Russia can be quickly defeated. Currently, Russia would demand Ukraine's capitulation for peace, as it believes in its own victory. A peace agreement in favor of Ukraine must first take away Russia's hope of victory. Only when Russia is sure that patience alone will not bring victory and the costs of escalation are too high, will it be ready for compromise. For Putin, general mobilization and full war economy are very risky. So risky that his rule could be threatened. But even these two measures would not solve all problems. Even a Russia in total war cannot keep up with the Western economic power if the West decides to unleash it. If Putin loses all hope of victory, one can expect that he will accept defeat if the alternative could mean his end. To take away all hope from Russia, the West must assist Ukraine with all the things I mentioned in the previous chapter, but with a twist. One must not only send new deliveries, one must show Russia that one is serious. This can only be done by committing now to enable Ukraine to have overwhelming superiority. That is, arms contracts would have to be signed now that would have been more appropriate in critical phases of the Cold War. Thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of armored personnel carriers, thousands of artillery guns, thousands of air defense systems, and at least 500, probably better 1,000 fighter jets would have to be ordered, while training begins simultaneously, as a passable combat pilot needs 3 years of training. One would have to not only announce and promise the deliveries, because paper is patience or talk is cheap, as the American says, one would have to commit. Contracts would have to be signed with painful penalties for breach of contract. This would have two advantages. It would give the arms companies planning security, enabling a tremendous increase in production, as the companies would then know that their factories and employees would be utilized and paid for. At the same time, Russia would know that Ukraine will soon be overwhelmingly superior as soon as the assembly lines in Europe and the US start sending 2 or 3 tanks a day to Ukraine. Russia would then only have a choice of negotiating a peace treaty from a position of strength, which it still has by occupying 20% of Ukraine, or waiting until Ukraine simply takes back whatever it wants. If there is no doubt that Ukraine will win the war, because soon it will be able to, then it is suddenly in Russia's interest to negotiate peace as quickly as possible, conceding before being forced into a quasi-capitulation. If you want to know why China will not come to Russia's aid in such a case, then subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon, because a video on that will also come here soon. If you want to support the channel, you can do so through the means in the description. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.